I started using drugs because I didn't feel like I belonged. If you don't admit that there's a problem there, then you're not going to be able to talk about it, deal with it. We're doing all this amazing stuff, and I feel empty inside. I feel gross. I feel guilt. I feel shame. I feel broken. And I'm like, what is life?
We meet our guest today whilst he is on mental health leave. Not something only his friends and colleagues know about. No, he has it on LinkedIn for everybody to see. On top of that, we talk about addiction. So brace yourselves for quite the conversation. Stefan Kollenberg is the co-founder of Crescendo, a diversity and inclusion platform. He shares with us the journey from his first experience of addiction as a sports-obsessed teenager to joining a startup where he worked crazy hours, neglected looking after himself, and ultimately showed the same patterns, but with work instead of substances. He had to dig deep to see that this was driven by the need to belong, to be worth something. Invariably, Stefan ended up burning out, took some time off, and co-founded Crescendo. He was not expecting that, accelerated by the global pandemic, he would find himself dangerously close to burning out again. It took an intervention by his co-founders for Stefan to accept how bad it was, and this is where the mental health leave comes in. We draw parallels between entrepreneurship and addiction. Why do people go into entrepreneurship? What do the obsession that people apply to get the next hit and the obsession of people building a business have in common? What do guilt and shame and not being enough got to do with it? Stefan is now focusing on being better and finding joy in life. The things that helped on the way are the 12-step programs he's attended, ongoing therapy, and the fundamental recognition that you cannot do this on your own. Please meet Stefan.
This is Naked by the Future Farm, where entrepreneurship is stripped to its vulnerable core. Brought to you by Vladi and Nektarios Lolios. And remember to subscribe, follow, and rate Naked to help us share it with the world. It's good to have you, Stefan. Hi there.
Thank you.
And hi, Nektarios. Good morning.
Hi, Vladi. This time it's Canada, Slovakia, and the UK.
Yeah.
Amazing.
It's the first time we have Canada, so
yes.
Quite exciting.
I feel special.
Yeah, you should indeed.
Thank you.
Stefan, could you, I wanted to actually ask you to locate yourself, which you already did, but could you give one sentence, 2-sentence intro for our listeners, and then we'll deep dive?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Stefan Kollenberg in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. Originally born in Ottawa, moved here about 7 years ago. For myself, I'm a social impact entrepreneur. Worked my entire career in early stage startups and very, very passionate about mental health. I've gone through the disease of addiction has been very present in my life. Dealt with mental health around anxiety and depression as well. And so it's just been a very prominent part of my life. And I like to talk about it and hear other people's opinions and experiences on how they've navigated it.
Yeah, awesome. And thanks for coming on the show. I wanted to acknowledge it straight away. When I was preparing for our recording today, I was just like tracing back how we got introduced. And so shout out to our common friend, Aldo. And I was reading the message and basically went something like, I have it here. It went, "Hey, Vladi, I'd like to introduce you to Stefan, entrepreneur who is currently on mental health leave." And then when I went to your website, there was this sentence that also struck me, which is, "Hi, I'm Stefan, and I'm an addict turned entrepreneur." And those two things, one from Aldo and one of your headlines sort of on your website, they both were sort of a strong point for me. And I thought there is so much to unpack, even on those two big areas. But before we do, could we go back and could you talk to us a little bit around when did you understand that the addiction and your relationship to drugs and drink was rather a symptom than the actual problem, and how did that sort of impacted your entry point to entrepreneurship?
Mm-hmm. That's a really good question. And a lot of people when they first hear addiction, they automatically jump to like, oh, you had a problem with drugs and alcohol. And I love the distinction there of a symptom, because it really is what the disease of addiction is. Just it's a mental disease, and it tells you that you're not good enough. It tells you that you need to be alone, that you can't deal with your emotions, your feelings. It's just a lot of toxic inner self-talk. And it thrives on forcing you to grab external things to deal with the problems or the challenges that you're facing internally. And so that was really that's how I think about it. And that's my experience with addiction, was that I started using drugs because I didn't feel like I belonged. And I was bullied quite a bit. I always felt out of place. I was a chameleon trying to change myself to be what I thought other people would like. And that led me to starting to use drugs. And then that kind of escalated through there. But the moment where I realized that, I think, was really when I got into the first 12-step program that I was a part of. I started in Alcoholics Anonymous, and because that was the only one that I knew. And it really, as I was working through the 12 steps, it really focuses on understanding that, yes, you might have you drank a lot, you used drugs a lot, but that's not the core of the problem here. Like, once you stop those, there's still a bunch of crap that you need to unpack, deal with, reflect on, because there was a bunch of behaviors, learned behaviors over time, that led you to pick up a drink, pick up a drug in the first place to numb yourself, to get away from those feelings. And I got clean early in my life. Like, I got like 2 weeks after my 19th birthday is when I stopped using and drinking. And for me, my entire like high school, like early university, I didn't deal with emotions. Whenever things came up that were challenging, I would get high or I would get drunk. And so I had to learn essentially how to process emotions, how to deal with these. Like it was so foreign to me. So when I stopped using those numbing agents, it was like, okay, well, I need something to pull on or to fill myself up. And that's when it kind of started moving into entrepreneurship, was that I found this external thing that other people put a lot of value in. And I was like, oh, I can do this and I can do it well and I can start growing. And then that will make me feel successful, make me feel good. And that was like, I think that's come from a lot of reflection in the moment. That's not what I was thinking. I was like, oh, I'm getting into the startup world. Like, this is exciting. It's cool. The first company I was with, I got to work with sports teams and travel. So I was like, oh, this is really exciting. But in retrospect, it was like, I was grabbing onto this external thing, pouring my entire life into it. And then constantly enjoying it felt like I validated my worth. Like, oh, I'm worth something to the world now. And so, yeah, that's how it kind of shifted into entrepreneurship.
Yeah, I was thinking very much of the self-worth. And Nektarios, I'm looking at your way, because that's something we've been talking together for the past 2 weeks together.
We can talk about this quite a bit, because from a very different angle, I realized that I got a lot of sense of worth through my public profile. And since I stepped back from my previous role, that has dropped a bit, quite a lot. And I was questioning, okay, what was this crutch? Because I should be deriving my sense of worth through somebody else. So this resonates from a very different angle. But I was curious, because you described your journey from recognizing the addictive behaviors and then going through a program to help you with it, and then going into entrepreneurship. But the way you describe it, was there an element of perpetuating some of these behaviors, just not using the substances, but actually what replaced drink and drugs? Yeah,
absolutely. Like 100%. Like, I would still go through cycles of, cause like when I was using, I went through I would go through cycles with things where I'd like really enjoy it. And then kind of like burn out of it, try something new. And that was a cycle. And I would perpetuate that with many things, not just drugs, but also like just other forms of substances or addictive behaviors. And so when I stopped, the first thing was I was working the program. I was focusing on school and focusing on the gym. And so I was at the gym 6 days a week, like an hour and a half long sessions, just working out. And I was obsessed with I've felt shitty about my body my entire life. And I just want to look great and I want to get pumped up. And this is it felt great. The endorphins, all these types of things. And I was like, oh, it's healthy. This is good. I'm working out. That's great. And then maybe a year into that, hurt my back deadlifting because I was just I was not having proper work. I was just pumped up. I was like, oh, I want to lift really heavy. And I hurt my back. And then I started not going as much. And then I got pulled into, started getting into the startup world, started getting into some school involvement. And that just pulled me away and I stopped going to the gym. So kind of burned out of that. The next phase was, I was very actively involved with school politics, school societies, stuff like that, in addition to working at a startup part-time. So poured everything into those experiences, stopped really, I kind of checked out of school. I was like, I don't feel engaged. I don't feel super interested. And I felt that I wanted to focus more on the extracurriculars, the things outside, building my network, building my skills as a partnership development the professional. That was what I was interested in. And then shifted into the first startup that I worked at and worked there for about a year and 9 months, traveled the world a lot. But that was the first serious burnout that I hit. Cause at the time I was I still had school. I still had a few student society things. And then I was working a full-time job. So it was all three of those things at once.
I can feel the heaviness because it's just, you can sense how much there is. And I wanted to kind of go back to it and reflect because it's something that, I've experienced myself sort of, but we've been seeing around is that what is the real motive for people to actually go towards entrepreneurship, right? And towards the startup world, if I would say more so. When on that journey, did you sort of first time started asking yourself around, why am I here? Why have I even decided to embark on that journey?
Mm-hmm. The first time I actually got into startups, I didn't really think much of startups. It wasn't something that I dreamed of. I dreamed of working in the sports industry because I loved sports. And I thought, okay, I'll combine my marketing background with sports and do sports marketing. But then I didn't want to when going to learning how to get into the industry, whatever, it was go sell tickets for a team. And I didn't want to do that. That sounded boring. And so I found the university I went to, Ryerson University, has an amazing startup ecosystem and a startup incubator associated with the university. And so I came across this sports technology company. I was like, oh, this is super cool. And then started as an intern there. And so that was actually the first kind of pretty much my first step into entrepreneurship. I had done joined a side project thing before, but that was the first real startup that I'd been a part of. And then from there, what I realized, and when I pivoted to eventually leaving there and deciding to start my own startup with a couple other co-founders, was that I loved solving really hard problems, but I wanted to have a positive social impact on the world because I felt that I was helping sports teams make money and it was cool. I was traveling the world working behind the scenes with these teams, but it wasn't very fulfilling after a while. It was just this is not I don't feel great about what's the positive impact that I've left on the world. And I wanted to do something different. And that's kind of when I got into Crescendo and the rest.
From what you shared right now, it actually feels I feel okay, first time it was sort of a passion towards the sport, right? It wasn't the entrepreneurship itself. And then later on the journey, it seems like you were sort of more open to hey, I want to see entrepreneurship as this force that drives positive change, and the whole journey was Crescendo, right? So that sort of feels quite authentic, and I can relate to that. So what has happened there with the whole burnout, and then I'm curious about their relationship to addiction. We can sort of unpack that more.
Yeah. So for me, with the going back to the first burnout that I had, it was, I think, setting myself up to be disappointed a bit, like the expectations I had placed on some other people at the first startup that I worked at, and I think not being the greatest communicator of what was going on inside of me, as I started to feel the struggle of working like 16 hours a day, 5.5 days a week, traveling to, like, I traveled to Australia, worked for like 4 weeks straight because we were working on a tennis tournament, and it was like 2.5 with the Australian Open. And so I was working every single day for 4 weeks straight and not eating well, not sleeping well. Like, all of these things started to build up. But in my head, the biggest priority is like, oh, the company needs to continue to grow, continue to succeed. I have to do this well. And so it was that the thing that was motivating me was this, like, wanting to feel like I had worth by doing a good job, and everything else could be sacrificed in order to do that good job. But that was not sustainable. And I mean, it's similar when we look back at addiction. It was like the number one goal became, oh, I need to like acquire drugs and alcohol to make myself feel better, and everything else could fall away and it didn't matter. It was just like, as long as I accomplished that one goal. And so I think it's interesting when we look at the parallels between addiction and entrepreneurship, because in some senses that, like, pure focus on one goal was very helpful. Like, it, like, don't get me, like, it grew when it was like, oh, we need to grow our revenue. And it was like, okay, Stefan, just go do that. Like, it was very successful, but it was not sustainable. It would take a huge toll on me, my physical, mental, emotional health. And yeah, it started to, like, when I got into Crescendo, it started pulling away. Like, I stopped going to meetings. I stopped working the program. I didn't have a sponsor anymore. And so I started the things that had helped me recover get through the first couple of years clean. I deprioritized them. I was like, oh, no, I'm fine now. Like, I did that. I don't need it anymore. I'm good. Like, we can just move on and I can deal with this. But it did not work. And I burned out yet again from, like, it was just this past year where with everything happening in the world and the growth of our business, everything, it ties in this interesting stream of, like, I've been dealing with a lot of, like, guilt of being a white man and working in the diversity inclusion space. Yeah. And trying to, it's something I've been working on with my therapist and trying to navigate. And I think a lot of people are trying to navigate this, and because of all the uprising that has happened this year. And, like, I thought about it before, but it just became even more present. But that guilt and shame pushed me further into, like, oh, I need to keep focusing on the business. This is how I'm having my impact. This is how I can use my privilege to help.
Yeah.
And that was, like, for me, that became the mindset of, like, okay, now continue to pour everything into this. And then that led to another series of burnout, and which led to me taking that mental health leave about 3 months ago.
Wow. This is a lot. And listening to your story, you talk about the signals that were there implicitly, right? So clearly, when you're in this, when you work your 16 hours a day, when you work for 4 weeks of solid work in Australia, there are other things you notice and you push them aside. But at some point, these signals flip into an element of recognition. Are you aware? Can you think back at the periods when you kind of reached that point where you said, I actually need help because I burned out? What was it that made those signals become loud enough or clear enough for you to actually do something about it?
Yeah, it's interesting. With the first signal, I spoke a lot about some of the things that are happening inside of me. There was also some toxicity within that company as a whole. But the first signal for me that kind of, like, really flipped the switch was, like, right after Australia, I moved to Boston to go through Techstars, and it was like living in a 3-bedroom apartment with the 5 people on the team, continuing to work like every single day, like go to the office at 8:30, 9 a.m. because it's breakfast there, stay until 9:30, 10 p.m., and then go back home, sleep, and then repeat, and do that for months and months on end. And then there was a few things that just broke inside of me when there's a few things. Like, one of my really good friends on the team had a disagreement with the co-founders, and then the co-founders essentially were like, no, it's my way, or like get out. And essentially then he left the company, and the way they treated him after, I saw him, he was like with me, like it felt like we had gone through the trenches together, getting underpaid, working on this mission, just being so passionate about helping solve the problem. And they like threw him away like he was disposable. Didn't even, like, when he was leaving, didn't even thank him. Didn't even say like, oh, like, thank you so much for all the like helping build our product, helping do this. It was just like, okay, bye. You're not part of our life anymore, and we're not going to talk about it. And it was just like disposable. It was like he was a piece of disposable garbage. And I was like, that's not how I want to be treated. That's not how humans should be treated. And so that flipped a huge switch inside of me. And I was like, what am I doing? Like, why am I sacrificing all of this for, like, yes, I care a lot about the company and wanting, and like, just, I was very passionate about it, but like, why am I sacrificing all of this, my mental, physical, emotional health, for someone else's profit, and then to get treated like shit? So that was the big flip for me, that realized like I need to get out of here and I need to take care of myself. And so I think kind of like a mirage got pulled from in front of my eyes of what I thought the company was, and the people within it. So I think that was the big trigger.
Yeah.
You mentioned the word guilt earlier in a very different context, and I was listening to your Techstars experience. Yeah. I started feeling an enormous sense of guilt because, having built Startup Bootcamp, which is another big global accelerator, we fueled this behavior. We encouraged this. We had people who moved from a different country into the program, and they all shared a small apartment, and they would go and come in the morning and then work late. And then, ironically, I once had a conversation with one of the founders who came to me and said, look, we do this life. We have this life. We have 4 guys in a 2-bedroom flat. And when I go back, I actually just want to chill. I just want to kick back and not talk about the business, because we live and breathe the business throughout the day. And I said to him, why don't you just talk to your co-founders? And he was like, I don't think I can do this. I said, well, just give it a go. And then that night he mustered up all his courage, and he actually addressed this with his other 3 co-founders. And the first thing the other guy said is, oh my God, I'm so glad you said something, because they all felt the same. They all felt this artificial pressure that was constructed by people like us to actually just perform. So it's a bit of a kind of diversion, but it just felt it. You just pressed the button there when you were talking about your experience and how it affected you, right? Because you forget that entrepreneurship, with all the glamour that it's been kind of presented and sold to kind of young, impressionable people, is not all that. And it's not all just about burning the candle at the midnight oil and all the other beautiful expressions, but it's also about looking after yourself. But you needed that external trigger, right, to go, this is not good for me. So you walked away from it, right?
Yeah. And then I walked into another startup 7 months later and founded it. But like I think my impression after leaving the first startup was like, oh, it is my identification of the problem was the individuals who founded the company. And that was like, oh, this is what I think is the problem. And so I found the company, and I do it with people who have similar values to me, and we want to create amazing workplaces, that burnout will go away. And it doesn't. It just, maybe it lasts a little longer. Like the phase before the burnout lasts a little bit longer, but it was still there. Like, if you don't take care of your mental, emotional, and physical health, like, you're going to burn out. It doesn't matter how passionate you are. Like and I remember there's different things that I would listen to. It was like, oh, if you're passionate about something, you can never burn out. And I'm like, I don't subscribe to that belief. It's like, if you don't take care of your body, it's going to
be deleted apart from all internets and books and everything. No, I would sign up to that.
Yeah.
You know, I'm there are so many things I want to go back to. the one around the guilt and also the sort of responsibility. I was just reading the book from Jerry Colonna, Reboot, yesterday night, and he talks about it. And I screenshot literally a page and sent it to one of the founders in Pakistan that we work with, who also told me once that, you know what, I just don't believe that I can, one, tell the other people because they won't be able to really deal with it. And I'm there, to solve that issue for them and take that responsibility as well. And that included co-founders, family, partner, whole entourage. I wanted to sort of go back into just let's stay for a little while around the comparison between your journey with the addiction towards the drink and the drugs and entrepreneurship. I'm curious, Stefan, what has the journey with the drugs and drink taught you on a positive terms, if anything, for your journey as an entrepreneur?
Mm-hmm. Another great question. So what really because if I go and I look at the 12 steps, like the first step is really acknowledging that you have a problem. It's like,
and you have to tell us more about the 12 steps because people might not know. Yes. I don't know.
Yes. Okay. Yes. So the 12 steps there's a bunch of different fellowships. There's like Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, Cocaine Anonymous, Codependency Anonymous, food, sex and love. Like there's a whole bunch of different, like whatever, there's a bunch of things you can be like, have those addicted tendencies channeled into. But these programs, they all run 12-step programs where essentially it has been over, like, I don't know how long, probably like 100 something plus years. People have gone through and gradually adjusted and perfected, maybe not perfected, and improved these 12 steps of recovery to help guide people who have the disease of addiction through a program that will help them recover and live a better life, be better, address their problems and not need to use whatever the form of addictive substance is. And so that's kind of the purpose of the 12 steps. But the first step is acknowledging that you have a problem, and accepting that you can't control it, that you can't do this on your own. Like you've tried, like I tried so many times to stop using, to force myself to step away, and it didn't work. And evidently, I mean, even after I quit drugs and alcohol, we can see like 5.5, 6 years of continued patterns of grabbing onto these external things to help myself feel better and try to love myself, and just fail. And so it's not something easy to let go of, but that's a big lesson, is just like admitting that there is a problem. If you don't admit that there's a problem there, then you're not going to be able to talk about it, deal with it, find solutions, like with anything. If you don't admit that problem or acknowledge what the problem is and find the right problem. I mean, when we look at like starting a business, my view is like, you don't start with an idea. You identify a problem, and then you try to solve that problem through a series of assumption tests. And it's the same thing with addiction, similar. It's like, you have to admit that problem and then move forward. Another thing that it has taught me, so the fourth step of the program is doing a searching and fearless moral inventory of yourself. And so this is taking like a very deep, hard look at what are all the resentments that I have? What am I afraid of? How have I been hurt by others? Where have I felt like I'm a victim? Where have I been abused, or what's the sexual relationships that I've had, and like the problems that have come up there. But then after writing down all of these things, like a lot of them are like, I feel this way about something. And then it's like, okay, stop, take a second. And what was your part in that? Like, how did you contribute to this situation happening? Yeah. And that is such a huge thing. Because I think like sometimes there's like this idea sometimes in startups, that at least in my experience, where it's like us against the world. If you're blaming a lot of other people for a bunch of stuff in your life, it's like, okay, well, what is my part in this as well? Like it's not a vacuum. I am involved with these situations somehow. And so just being very honest with yourself. But I mean, that also, the hard thing there is not being too hard on yourself and not like ripping yourself to shreds and being like, I'm a horrible person and I have no self-worth and I'm not great. Like it's a very difficult balance. So I think what the program has helped teach me is like finding that balance, and is a constant work in progress of like, yes, taking accountability, taking responsibility for the parts that I have played, but also there are things that other people have done that I couldn't control and that I didn't have influence over, and they were not great. They weren't great things. And so I think it's just like finding that balance and acknowledging that. So I've done a lot of reflection on myself and working through that. And that has helped me in my entrepreneurial career as well. That like, cause the program instills values of honesty, open-mindedness, and willingness. And like, those are values that I work to live by and make a very conscious effort to live by. And that is what helped me be so successful at understanding problems and then being a salesperson that was selling something that would actually solve a problem and help people address a really challenging thing within their companies.
I'm glad I asked you the question because this was so rich and there's so many lessons learned. The other way, and I always loved the questions since the moment I found it, which is around like, how have I been complicit to the situation that I say I don't want to be in? I find it so powerful and sort of like it makes you feel naked first, like, oh my God, like overwhelmed. And I've been seen now, or I'm seen, and then just facing it. All those lessons that you said felt like they should be integrated from really a high school, that we should go through those.
Yeah.
And then I have plenty of other stuff to say, but I'll shut up for now.
I love that point because I honestly do think, and it's interesting when we look at Crescendo from an early stage, it was like, okay, how can we help people change their behavior to be more inclusive, to be more open-minded? And we actually, our first model of behavior change was based off of the model of behavior change of Alcoholics Anonymous. Like there had been research done, because like when you think about 100%. Like the amount of behavior change that I have seen in this program from other people is ridiculous. Like there's people who were addicted to meth and crack for 10 years, and then cut it all off. They've turned their life around. They have a family. They have a full-time job. Like they went from being like addicted to some of the most addictive substances in the world, being in jails, working on the streets, to having a family, being happy, loving other people. Like the amount of behavior change that these programs have created is outstanding. And so that was something that really led me to wanting to, it's like, okay, well, how can other people experience the benefits of this and like improve? Because yes, a lot of it is like specific to addiction and like dealing with these things, but there's so many lessons that go out beyond just dealing with, because it's like learning how to be a better, like human? More fulfilled human. Yeah. Exactly. It's like not only to yourself, but to others. And so I think there's so many lessons that we can take and pull. So I love that, that you bring that up. Yeah. And I think also I wanted to go back and add something to one of the last points I made around the like looking at your place within the interactions. And I think there's like an interesting, challenging to navigate lens when you put like racism and oppression on top of that. And like you inspect it from like, yes, wanting to take accountability and being reflecting, to also being like living within a system of oppression that has oppressed you and people like you for so long. So I think it's like, when I share that, I'm also like acknowledging that I'm a white man and I've not really dealt with that. Like systemic racism has not negatively impacted me for the most part. It's negatively impacted a lot of people in our society as a whole. But I think there's an important like thing to acknowledge there. And it's another hard, very deep, difficult thing to deal with and navigate. Like, I mean, it doesn't just have to be racism. It could be xenophobia, like just any of these different isms, and trying to feel, okay, like, yes, I need to take some accountability, but also like not victim blaming. So like these things are so hard to navigate, but I just wanted to mention that as a point.
It's funny you mentioned that. So I've gone through life going, oh, I've been an immigrant all my life. Oh, I'm gay. I've had all these minority experiences that I felt were negative. And then it was literally only with the BLM movement that I realized that no matter what my experiences were, I still have a ridiculous amount of white privilege because I'm a white man. It doesn't matter that I've got some other minority attributes, because the two key drivers in all of this, despite the slightly Middle Eastern face, has always been privilege, right? And then you start talking about this to your white mates, and they really don't like it. And you go, how is this possible? So no, this is really kind of, the reason I mentioned this is mainly on the point of, you need to do some work on this. But even when you think you're kind of aware of it and you have had some sensitivity about it, some reflection, some empathy, etc., it's an easy trap to step into. And it's a difficult one to pull yourself out of.
Your mental health leave. Please tell us about that, because that's still not very common for founders, like just to say and have I think you had it in your LinkedIn. Did you?
Yeah.
So tell us about that. And I'm curious particularly about that, a relationship also to your co-founders and to your team with regards to your mental health leave.
Yeah. So it's been building up for a while. So actually it goes back to last year, 2019, October, when we had been trying to fundraise. There's a whole bunch of stuff happening in the business that was like increasing my stress levels, and we were going through a pivot. There's just a whole bunch of stuff happening. And then I started exploring my sexuality and being like, oh, am I straight? Am I not straight? And then, so it's just like the intersection of all this business stress, all of this like personal identity stress. Cause I was like, oh, I'm a founder of a diversity inclusion company. I need to know what my identity is. And if I don't, cause I was very public and talking about experience, mental health, identity, all that stuff. I was like, if I don't know how to talk about this, then who am I? Like there was all this crap floating around my head, and I was having a breakdown. And so then I started going to therapy, after like I'd done therapy in the past, but started really like going full time to therapy, working through a lot of these things, started on antidepressants. And so that was like I took a 2-week break, in 2019. And I felt great. I built all these healthy habits. I was getting my weight under control. I was like dealing with my mental health. I was like, oh, I feel so good. And then we fast forward, COVID starts, and at this point we had like one paycheck, like 2 weeks of payables, like to our employees left. And like the business was like on the brink. It was like very, very close to everything shutting down. So a huge amount of stress, having to cut our salaries, all of these things. But then what happened with COVID was that our product was a diversity inclusion learning tool. A lot of the piece was around digital learning for enterprises. And then, so first there was the wave of COVID where, okay, all the workshops now can't really be done. Like there's virtual ones, but they're not as good. And so there's this huge shift to digital learning in the diversity inclusion space. And then BLM happened, and there's massive prioritization of diversity inclusion. So there's these two mega trends that started moving really fast, and we were at the middle of that. And we had a sales intern who was helping out, but I was pretty much the only like person selling to the enterprise category. And I was getting overwhelmed. Like if I look back at my calendar, it's just like a brick of meetings, because I was also selling to the West Coast. So it was like, okay, start my day at 8:30, end my day at like 8:39. And I would eat breakfast. Like I went home to live with my parents for the first 4 months of the pandemic. And they would like, some days I would just like, it would be like 2 p.m. and they're like, oh, here's your lunch. And I was like, oh yeah, I forgot to eat lunch. Like, oh crap, like, oops. And then like it would just be like, they would bring me food. And so this buildup of like business, personal stress, all of this kind of started culminating in me not being able to deal with my stress anymore. And it starting to leak out and impact other people. And like, this was again, because I was not going to the program. I was not working my 12 steps. I didn't have a sponsor. I wasn't connected to other people, and I was still doing therapy. But then one day in therapy, I was just like, I was telling my therapist, like, I wish I had a community of people who also dealt with the shit going inside their head so I could just talk about it. And then I was like, oh yeah, that's what Narcotics Anonymous was for me. And I was like, I just had this realization. I was like, damn, yeah, like I thought I didn't need it anymore. I thought I was good and I was like fine. And I was like, oh no, I need this. I need to go back to this. And so I started going back to meetings. I was still working full time though. And then like, it just got to a point where I was like, just breaking down. I had called my co-founder one night, Tuba, and I was just losing my mind. I was having suicidal thoughts. I was just like, I was just having this big identity crisis, because I was like, we just grew our revenue. We've been growing our revenue 25, 30% month over month for like 6 months. We're solving all these problems. We're doing all this amazing stuff. We'd built this anti-racism learning pack, and we were donating like $50,000 to charity, because we had we worked it out so that we could have encourage the enterprise customers that we were working with to buy this package, which would then fund a donation to charity. And so it was like, we're doing all this amazing stuff, and I feel empty inside. I feel gross. I feel guilt. I feel shame. I was like, I feel broken. And I'm like, what is life? Like, if I'm doing all of these amazing things, why? If I still feel empty at the, after all of this. And so I was just like, I was not in a good place. And so after there had been conversations about my stress and trying to deal with it and try to improve so that I could be a better teammate, these types of things. But then after that call, my co-founder talked to a couple other people, my other co-founder and people on the team, and they essentially had an intervention. And we grabbed lunch, and he was like, hey dude, you need to take a break. You need to stop. This company can't kill you. We can't let that happen. Your life is more important than this. And so that was a big moment for me, just a recognition and allowing myself to step away and try to take a break. That was hard, because we're in the middle of all of this. I'm I don't want to step away. I've got deals with Twitter and Amazon in the pipeline. I don't want to step away from this. Right now, we have to close these, but then it's if I don't step away, there's always going to be another deal that I could close. It's not going to stop. It doesn't go away.
I feel like we need to take a deep breath, all of us, just because there's a lot, honestly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there a difference between you realizing yourself, I need help, and going to join one of the programs as you did before, or your mates, your co-founders, the people who spend most of the time sitting you down and going, you know what, practically saying, and I'm being provocative here, saying, you've been through this before and you managed to recognize it yourself, but this time we need to tell you because you're not seeing this.
So when I first got clean, I didn't recognize it myself. Actually, with the thing that prompted me, is interesting. This is a great question. The thing that got me to get clean and go to these meetings was that I had one really, really bad night out. A bunch of stuff happened. Won't get into details, but it was just a very bad night. My roommates at the time, who I was using with, kicked me out of the apartment. They're like, you can't live here anymore. You have a really bad problem and you need to deal with it. And it was after the people that I used drugs with were like, dude, you have a problem. You need to go figure this out. And that woke me up. I was like, oh shit, who am I? Looking in the mirror, strung out, still super high, and then coming down and being like, what is my life? What am I? Who is this in the mirror? I don't recognize this person. And so it was almost kind of similar, where this external thing shocked me, because it was oh, now my co-founders who I'm building this with, who we're all in this, invested in this together. The success of it is dependent on continuing to grow and be able to raise funding. They're telling me that I should take a break. I'm like, oh, maybe I should take a break. So it's interesting. Yes, there was a realization of okay, now that I had that external shock, is rather than there's some, I know some people who have responded to that type of external thing with no, fuck you, I don't have a problem. Sorry for swearing. And just I don't have a problem. I don't need to deal with this. Go away. And they'll respond like that. So I guess I'll acknowledge that I did have the awareness to be yes, okay, I do need to step away. This is the thing that's this is my bottom. There's a saying in the programs, your bottom is where you stop digging. And it's that was where my bottom was. I chose to stop digging and get help.
How are you today? How are you doing?
That's a good question. I'm doing better. I'm more grounded, more comfortable with what aware of what I want from life. I like we were talking before we started recording about the morning routine, and I am loving my morning routine. Like I wake up at like 7ish. I go for a 30 minutes, hour long walk. I have breakfast. I'll do some like NA step work. I'll go to an NA meeting, and now I'm learning how to dance, and that's
pretty cool.
So I'm just like, I'm finding like my priority for moving forward is like finding joy. It's like, how can I find joy in my life and do the things that I want to do with my life? And so that's been a really powerful sentiment. And it's almost like shifting. It's like, what is the priority? Like, what is that end goal that I want to get towards? And it's kind of shifted. It's more about like, yes, I want to be even more like, yes, I had talked a lot about mental health before. I'd worked a lot on my mental health before, but I was still like, I think there's parts of it where I was still like halfway in. Like I was, yes, like very much into it and like working on therapy, like all of these things. But I think now I'm like fully on board and like continue, like really invested in the program, and I'm seeing all the benefits that it is having for me and continuing to have. And so I feel optimistic about where my life is headed, and the habits that I'm starting to build and the practices I'm starting to build to live a healthier life. And also redefine like what is the goal in life? Is the goal to make money and be successful and blah blah blah?
It feels like a beautiful place to sort of start wrapping up. And I want to just thank you and there was some call for an invite.
That was actually the notification for my NA meeting at 10 a.m.
Okay.
In half an hour.
So you see, I was right. But no, thank you so much. I mean, on a personal level, I wanted to thank you because I was coming, and Nektarios knows because I talked to him before we started recording that today was sort of a tough day for me. And it was related to co-founders and finding my own way. And one thing that you said, which was around that the first step is to admit that you have a problem, felt that it actually lightened up on my end because I think that's where I am also myself. And it sort of feels like you want to tear up even now. But I wanted to thank you for coming, on air and just having this very honest conversations with us. And what a beautiful journey you are on.
So thank you. And yeah, thank you both for having, Nektarios, go ahead.
No, that's okay. There's no sequence in this.
I will thank you both for having me. This has been fun. You've created a very safe and warm space to be able to have this kind of vulnerable conversation. And I've hosted a podcast for a long time, and I know it's not always easy to do, especially considering the virtual world. So I'm very grateful for both of you to invite me on. It's been fun.
I'm glad to hear it. We try to create a safe environment. It's a cliche word, but we know that our listeners really want to hear the different facets of what will affect them when they build a business, what can affect them, and learn from it, right? And you're very, I use this word probably quite too much on the podcast. This is more for Catherine and Vladi. Very articulate about what goes on in yourself, because that recognition, that level of empathy you have with yourself and with others is really just heartwarming, because that's what we want to also convey is you need to do some work on yourself. And you have to start somewhere, and having people share how they had a point where they had to start that work, and recognizing that externally or internally triggered, right, is probably one of the big things, because we also want people who are in the situation that you have put behind you to get some hope that there is a way out of this. It's not sudden. There's no quick fix. No. But you work on yourself, and that's why your story has been really inspirational, and I'm grateful from that perspective. Thank you. Join us next week to reflect and digest. You've been listening to Naked by The Future Farm, where entrepreneurship is stripped to its vulnerable core. To learn more about our work, sign up to our newsletter or visit thefuturefarm.co. where you can also apply to be a Naked guest. Naked is produced by Dan Turgel and edited by Catherine Dworke. And remember, subscribe, follow, and rate Naked to help share it with the world.